Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another weather forecast here by Asian Weather Forecast. As you guys can tell, this would be a hurricane discussion and forecast here for the Atlantic hurricane season for 2020 here. This is going to be another update just to see exactly, we're going to be taking a look into the Atlantic and see exactly how favorable it is to have hurricanes in the next coming weeks and all of that. So be sure to stay tuned for that if you love the tropics. So I'm planning on maybe having discussion every other week or maybe once a week. So let me know, guys, in the comments if you guys will want to have a hurricane discussion once a week, and just let me know so I will do that. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, guys. We're gonna be talking about the tropics all of the season and tropical season, Atlantic season. So be sure to subscribe if you love tropics, and also be sure to share the channel to any friend or family that you know will love my daily weather forecast or that you know will love my tropical updates. Both that for do this in this video. Here we are looking at the satellite imagery here. We're going to be taking a little brief moment on this video to look at a tropical storm Arthur. It actually is so tropical. Surprisingly, I thought this was going to be post-tropical just by the look at it. But here we have this low pressure system right here of Arthur. As you see, this is where New York City is. So it's not too far off the coast. We have a little bit of cloud cover for parts of the mid-Atlantic coast, but I'd see we have the most dense cloud cover to the northeast of this system, or the low pressure system. So it's very one-sided. We have the most of the strongest winds and the most dense cloud cover in this area of the low pressure system, and we have a lot of vorticity and cyclonic rotation still. I do expect this to become post-tropical very soon, as it looks like it's falling apart. We are seeing the eye kind of coming out a little bit. So it does seem like it's definitely going to become post-tropical by the next update here, whenever they fly in the storm. But yeah, this is definitely looking post-tropical. You see it's very unorganized now. I did expect to see post-tropical by the time we woke up, but it's not. But as you see, we have very little cloud cover for this area and a lot of cloud cover for this area. So it is still looking like it is a little bit one-sided on the system with the amount of dry air to the west and all of that. But yeah, we still have a lot of rotation here, a lot of vorticity in this system right here. So it definitely is still tropical, but it's not. It doesn't look like it's full tropical right now. It seems like it will be post-tropical very soon. As we now take a look at Tropical Storm Arthur in the new update, we actually have now a gust of 60 miles per hour here, maximum sustained, maximum winds at 50 knots there. So our minimum central pressure has gone down to 991 millibars, and last night was 993. So this thing is still strengthening, but seems like it will be post-tropical by the next update here. Just seems like it will become post-tropical. It will have tropical storm wind gusts, but it's just not going to have the resemblance to still become to still be a tropical storm. And as you see, we are still seeing the system now moving quite fast, and we are seeing this system right here. It is looking like it will be post-tropical by the next update here. As you see, we don't have that. We don't have that black circle there for that tropical storm there, which indicates it is not going to be full tropical. So this is what it was earlier today at 5 a.m. We had a huge area of tropical storm force winds, which is a huge area. This is a huge area right now, but it seems like it will be heading towards the Bermuda area as a post-tropical depression there, as the resemblance really by Thursday. But this is not looking like a major system anymore, in my opinion. Yeah, it's going to continue to weaken here. Here it is at 50 knots, so it is 60 miles per hour, I believe. So that maximum sustained wind is going to continue to weaken from now on. So by the next 48 hours, this thing is going to be, of course, that post-tropical depression as it does move to the area of Bermuda, as it is going to take that huge turn to the east and then go like that. So it's take a weird track. Here's Arthur right now. As you can see, it's very far off the coast compared to what it was last night. Here it is at 60 miles per hour as maximum sustained winds and minimum central pressure at 991 millibars. So we're going to talk really brief about this. As you see, we still have that very good chance of seeing a tropical force wind here. So a big area of 90 to 100% chance for seeing tropical force winds, which is more than 39 miles per hour. It doesn't exactly mean it's still going to be tropical storm. It could be post-tropical with tropical storm force winds. This is because it won't have maybe all the convection it needs, or it's just not organized anymore. So it seems like this is definitely the possibility for tropical storm force winds will continue to increase for Bermuda. They are around the 20 to 30% chance, not too far from that 30 to 40% chance you guys will be hit as a post-tropical depression, but could be seeing some strong wind gusts that are tropical storm force winds. Now that we talked about Arthur, now we're going to be talking about the general. Now we're going to get into this hurricane 2020 Atlantic season discussion. This is when we're going to really start talking about this. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the SSTs here, anomalies for the northern Atlantic right now. Of course, this is going to be including the tropical Atlantic, which is right here. But of course, this is an anomaly, so this can continue to change every single day because SSTs do change every single day. But as you see, we have very warm waters across the areas of the northern Atlantic right here. And these areas aren't necessarily the most favorable areas for preseason systems or early season systems. This is really the general area. We have our best potential to see systems to come off, low pressure systems to come off the African coast, the West African coast, and then this is where you have invest or tropical depressions form, and then they move move westward towards the U.S. and the Caribbean. But real concern right now is that we are having some very warm waters in the areas of the Caribbean, and it's very likely that we can have brewing systems, depending if we have all the ingredients. If we have a little area of no shear, we have a lot of moisture coming off the coast, and this is the perfect area where we could have tropical systems. But we have our warmest waters generally right here, and then this is really the middle of the Atlantic here. We have up to possibly 2 to maybe even 4 degrees Celsius above average. So definitely a very warm area. That don't necessarily see many systems forming in the middle of these areas here, but could definitely see some systems that could form right here without a doubt. And of course, this is what we have it currently right now. This is currently what it looks like right now. So doesn't mean exactly there's going to be a system that forms in this area, because we can have a lot of shear that doesn't form. But as of right now, this is really our big area of very warm waters here at this area. And also if we have these waters warm up off the coast of Africa, this will actually be a big concern, because usually when it comes to the early storms that form in June, they usually form off the coast of Africa and then heads towards the Caribbean. But even with the Gulf, we are seeing the Gulf starting to warm up as well. So we also see our first storms of the season usually form as well in the Gulf of Mexico, just like off the coast of Africa. So we're really watching out, as we are seeing not really many areas with any really big cool water. Here we only have less than a degree Celsius below average or below freezing. Below average, and these waters are warm enough, so this isn't a big threat. We just need this to warm up a bit more. This is where we have our best chance to possibly see that big possibility for some system to form. But really, our coolest waters are in the far northern Atlantic, and we don't really have any systems to worry about there to form at any point at this time of the year. So speaking of SSTs here, you're probably wondering why we are starting to see these cooler waters across the northern Atlantic here, and starting to see these a bit more cooler waters in these areas. That is because we are getting close to a La Nina, and for many of those people who know, La Nina is a negative 0.5 down. So anything below a negative 0.5 on an anomaly here is considered a La Nina. This is how they measure it. Like anything above a 0.5 is a El Nino. Same thing, but with La Nina. So that's how it is right now. And we are, as you see, the anomalies are currently right now. This is updated May 19th, so this is all updated here. This is now at a negative 0.308, so it is not too far from that negative 0.5. It is still negative 2 away. So this system's these anomalies are getting very close to La Nina. So that's where we're gonna start seeing these cooler waters in the Pacific, and gonna start seeing some cooler waters across areas in the far northern Atlantic. And that's what's starting that last year in the Atlantic, and brewing warm waters across the tropical Atlantic. So this is exactly why we are seeing these cooler waters across the Pacific and some cooler waters across the Atlantic, because La Nina is very close from now to actually forming. We should have a La Nina by the end of, or by the next month or so. So this trend for La Nina is increasing. So very likely we're going to have a La Nina for this summer, which of course La Nina does mean on average, La Ninas bring more active seasons compared to El Ninos, but also some neutral It's different every single year for a neutral, but just because we are going to be in a La Nina doesn't necessarily guarantee a super active season. It's just this year it does look like it's going to be very active, very little shear, and also very little SAL, which is Saharan air layer, which is that warm air aloft of dry air off the coast of Africa. If we have a lot of dust off the coast of Africa, that does decrease the possibility of having systems forming off the coast of Africa or anywhere we have a lot of dust from Africa. We have all this dust in the Saharan desert, all this dust. That's going to be moving, that dust with the winds are going to pick up and move up into the east, to the west with all that wind and the wind shear that's going to pick up that dust and take it to the Atlantic. And basically, we have very little dust this year off the coast of Africa, very little dust. As you see, our max, the darkest color we actually see is really like a kind of light orange, dark orange. That's a low to mid level for dust. And usually we have pinks and dark, or pinks and light pinks. That means a lot of dust, but we have very little dust off the coast of Africa. Obviously, we will have dust in these areas at this time of year, but compared to last year, we have very little dust off the coast of Africa. So that's a very big concern. That means we're going to have multiple systems to form across the coast of Africa that move to the west and possibly affect the Caribbean in these areas. So it's very favorable conditions as long as we see these waters to warm up a little bit and we have no shear or any low-level jet. We can be seeing a very good possibility to have events that could form here, because we are seeing very noticeably very little very little dust. And what that dust does, that Saharan dust, when it comes off the coast of Africa and goes in the Atlantic, that's going to make this atmosphere very dry, which dry atmosphere is extremely unfavorable for hurricanes, because you're feeding off that warm water. You need all that moisture that feeds this hurricane, just like the warm waters. But the dry air, it's going to make it fall apart here. So definitely going to be seeing that huge area as well for that Saharan desert, or Saharan air layer, or Saharan dust. So now that we looked at the current SAL, let's go and check out the future SAL, or Saharan air layer forecast. So as you see, we are having we are seeing Saharan dust across the Atlantic, tropical Atlantic right now, parts of the Caribbean. But you don't want to see these dark browns, the ones that are over Africa right now. That dark brown, you don't want to see that. And as you see, we do have browns, but it's very light. So that means very little dust. Let's go ahead and check the future. This is what we're looking at right now. Let's go check out the future. As you see, we are going to be seeing very little dust in this area. We'll be seeing a little bit of pickup right here, but it's noticeably not that much. As we now get all the way to May 20th, we still have very little dust moving in this area. And even by May 21st, we have very little dust. We have a ton of dust off in the atmosphere in Africa, but off the coast in the Atlantic, we have very little dust. We have a flow of dust, because that is with the wind. We are having that wind picking up that dust, and that's why the dust always moves to the west. So you're gonna be seeing like a little line, always gonna be seeing that dust across the Atlantic. But this year we're seeing a very little dust amounts. We aren't seeing those very dark browns. We aren't seeing the pink colors. We're seeing more like light orange and light brown, which means very little dust. So it's very favorable atmosphere. It's not as dry as it was last year, so we can definitely have brewing systems that can form. It's very favorable. We have decent SSTs, all depending exactly how the shear plays. We can definitely have a concern for maybe even a Bertha to form this area if it didn't form in the Caribbean with those favorable conditions. So it seems like the conditions for off the coast of Africa and for the Caribbean seem to be very, very favorable at this point right now in the next coming weeks, to be very favorable to have tropical systems to form. Now let's check the future for the wind shear here. So of course we're going to be seeing a lot of that we're going to be seeing that wind shear flow across the Atlantic, which is exactly why we have that dust particles, that Saharan dust. That's exactly why it's in that same little section across the Atlantic, because that's the area where we have that strongest shear. As you see, in the coming hours, we have very little shear in this general area. Doesn't mean it's going to be something there to form, but I'm just an example where we have the most favorable conditions right here. Very little shear. It's not extremely favorable at this point to have anything brewing right now. So you're probably thinking, oh, we can have a system to form off the coast or the Caribbean any minute now. Well, not necessarily. We have that huge area, that huge line of a lot of wind shear. For those people who know severe weather, a lot of wind shear is very favorable for severe weather. But for the tropics and tropical cyclones or tropical systems, it's very unfavorable because the wind shear can take down those systems if it does not strengthen fast enough. But we are going to be seeing, noticeably, we are going to be seeing very little shear in the Atlantic at this moment. We are seeing some areas with a lot of shear, some pockets of very powerful shear. But in general, in the northern Atlantic in general, at this point, we're seeing very little shear. Obviously, we will be seeing some purple, obviously we'll start seeing some oranges and some browns. So that's normal to have that shear in the higher atmosphere. But as you see, we do have, noticeably compared to the past couple of years at this point of the year, we have very little shear. This is by Friday, so very long point of very little shear across the Atlantic, which is going to increase that possibility for something to occur. And like I said, the Caribbean is on my radar for possibly having a system in the next coming weeks. Cause look at this. By a week from now, we have a huge area across the Gulf and the Caribbean that has like no shear whatsoever, and they have those and the Gulf is also warming up. So this whole area is on my focus right now for the next coming weeks because very little shear. That's example. And then we have that huge area of shear across the west coast of Africa. So if you guess right, this compared to this is very favorable. This is the most favorable section. This is way more favorable than off the coast of Africa at that point. And as we continue all the way to now next Thursday, still very little shear across the Gulf and parts of the southeastern coast and Caribbean. That's exactly why it is so favorable at this moment to have something form in the coming weeks for the Caribbean or the Gulf Coast. And we are seeing this wind shear. We're still seeing a lot of wind shear off the coast of West Africa and parts of the tropical Atlantic. But for the Gulf, for the parts of the Caribbean, southeastern coast, we have very little shear. At this point, this is way more favorable to have a system in the next coming days than this area, unless we have something brewing right here. That is a very good possibility. We can even have something possibly form right here. There's multiple possibilities at this point that I'll just show you guys examples on that wind shear. Now as we look at now talking wise, what month can have the most systems based on the anomalies. We're going to be looking at the precipitation anomaly. Of course, anomaly changes every single day, but this is going to be looking at the precipitation. Obviously, the more precipitation you have in an area, the more favorable it is for a tropical system. As we now look into June, this is for every month, so June, July, August. So this is not like for every week. For general June, we are going to be seeing very favorable conditions for the Caribbean and parts of the Gulf, like we saw in the wind shear. Very little wind shear, getting closer and closer to June. This whole area for the next coming weeks. So with all that precipitation, very little wind shear, and possibly going to be seeing these very warm SSTs at this point in June, the Caribbean seems very favorable to have systems, multiple possibilities of having systems of brew. And we have that little area across the west coast of Africa that also has a ton of precipitation. And if we do have that, since we are seeing very little African Saharan dust in those areas, that's also pretty favorable. It's just not necessarily a huge possibility because we have very dry air across surrounding it. So we can have maybe a system or two to form in this area, but who knows if they actually last. If now getting to July, we start to see a bit more moisture in the tropical Atlantic. We are start seeing that more moisture across South America and the west coast of Africa. And we're also seeing a bit more moisture across the northern Atlantic. So we could definitely have something brewing across the west coast of Africa. And then maybe take a track like that. Who knows? But it's of course, just because you are seeing a drier atmosphere like this, it doesn't look. It's barely above average. So it's right here. It's -2. That is very, that's like nothing. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you're not in a green doesn't mean you can't have something there. I'm just saying it's not as favorable, if you know what I mean. That's July. And August is a big concern. If we look at August, and you can see why. We have a ton of moisture off the coast of Africa. Who knows if that wind shear is still there? Who knows if that possibility for if the Saharan or SAL even increases, which I highly doubt. Look at this whole area. This whole area is going to be seeing a ton of moisture in the whole month of July. This is a great potential to have multiple systems to move across the Caribbean, Gulf Coast, and southeastern coast. We can have multiple systems to develop across these areas, which can move following the moisture. They can follow the moisture where the moisture is. They can follow where it goes. So like I've been saying multiple times, August is my main area of concern. I know every month is the concern for hurricane season, but August, based on the anomalies, seems like it could be the month where we can maybe have the most landfalls in this United States, maybe the most activity in the tropical Atlantic in general. Who knows? But looking at August, we definitely have a very favorable atmosphere and conditions for systems. September, not necessarily. We do have very scattered different anomalies or conditions. We have dry conditions right next to wet conditions. So it's very, let's say, disorganized for September, because we can have anything weakening, strengthening right before it goes to track. But September, obviously, we can't rule out the possibility. September usually every single year tends to be that year we have our biggest systems. Doesn't look like that this year, in my opinion. But here we have bringing a lot of moisture across the west coast. Who knows? Maybe we can see this dry air, and it's not even that much drier than normal. It's not even past a -1. So this is absolutely nothing really. So we can have anything go through this way, because we have pockets of very dry air, but it's not even that much drier than usual. So September does, yes, have a concern, but compared to August and July, I wouldn't say so. And then by October also have. I'm watching for the Caribbean on October with all this moisture, maybe the southeastern coast. We have a ton of moisture brewing in the Caribbean. It's going to be very above average, possibly 4 to 6. A lot. That's pretty warm, or a lot more. And same thing with November. Of course, the season does end November 30th, and we have brewing moisture across the Caribbean. So we can definitely have multiple systems across more into the western Atlantic than eastern Atlantic by the end of the season. So that's looking at that as we check out the bulk shear. So you want to see blue because you want to see below average shear. As you look into June, we have very little. We have a lot more shear, a pocket. That's where we can possibly see a bit more SAL, Saharan air level. Seems like we will be seeing, air layer, not level, air layer, SAL, Saharan air layer. We are going to be seeing a bit more shear in this whole area across the tropical Atlantic all the way to June, or all the way to the southeast. That could be because that's basically saying maybe June could be the best, could have the most Saharan dust. So June does have a couple areas a decent amount of shear, but we also have this whole area that could either be slightly above average shear or below average shear. This whole area, so we don't always have to have something form right off the coast of Africa. Like we saw Arthur, it literally formed right here in May. So we can have multiple possibilities and outcomes. As we look into now July, this is why July seems to be also my main concern. August and July are my top months of focus, with October and September not far behind. Because look at this, all of the below average shear. That's because that's La Nina is going to be coming in place maybe by end of June, and that could cause a huge difference compared to June and July. July definitely sees a huge possibility. We have a huge possibility of maybe seeing systems in the Caribbean, the Western Caribbean, the Gulf Coast, or the tropical Atlantic because of the very little shear. And look, that means possibly very little African Saharan dust. As we now look into August, now we're seeing a ton of wind shear, or a ton of wind shear across the tropical Atlantic. But look, we also have this whole area right here that doesn't have too much shear. This whole area. And we also have a very little shear across the Western Caribbean and the Gulf Coast. Multiple possibilities for August. September, we have September seems to be that 1 month that doesn't have that huge possibility. And you want to know exactly why? We have the areas that have very little shear surrounded by a lot of shear. As you see, we have a lot more shear across the tropical Atlantic, the northern Atlantic, all the way to the Caribbean, the off Central America. We have a lot more above our shear, very widespread. For October, though, October has very little shear across the northern Atlantic. We have all the way to the west coast of Africa to the southeastern coast that has very little shear to really no shear whatsoever. That's exactly why October seems to be another area of focus. And then by November, we also have we have a lot more shear across the west coast of Africa. And that's really not really a huge concern because we don't really have any systems that form off the coast of Africa in November. That's not where we really look like. That's not where we look for for tropics in November. But we have a brewing possibility for the Caribbean. We have a decent amount of. We actually have very little shear, but we have shear to the north. But of course, just because it's slightly above our shear doesn't mean we can't have something to move through there. It's just obviously the blue is going to be more favorable than the purple than the orange. So definitely, if we have this shear, maybe go down. We can have something to go like that. But definitely think that the Caribbean seems to be a big possibility across much of the season. As we now we're generally going to be looking at the wind speed. So here we have Arthur right now. 996 millibars. So it's going to start weakening. That's exactly why I think it could be post-tropical very soon. So this is basically, we're going to be focusing for any low pressure systems that can possibly form this general area. This is going to be my general area to really focus about for June. But my most favorable area for June and going into June and end of May, this is my area of focus for the end of May and parts of June. I think this is our square of focus or area of focus, or main area of focus. Of course, we're also going to watch out as we're seeing very little Saharan air layer. We're going to be seeing very little Saharan dust. Going to be seeing a decent amount of shear. So that's exactly why this is my primary threat. We're seeing a lot less shear there. And as we move on, we're going to be seeing multiple low pressure systems across the west coast of Africa. Not going to really form anything, but we have one little system possibly by May 31st. This is something. This is something a little interesting. I know it's super duper far out, but I'm saying this is exactly what I'm looking for. Something in this general area, this general vicinity. This is my area, my general vicinity right here for the end of May and June, or parts of June. It looks like we generally have a system very interesting right here. Could definitely be something as well. Same thing here. We have possibly a potential for two systems in this general area. That could definitely mean we can have very favorable conditions in that general area, that general time period, which can brew multiple systems. And this is also another system to focus on in June 2nd, our second day into the officially second day in the Atlantic hurricane season. We have another system that actually looks way more favorable. As you see, it looks like we can even have some strong winds in this. Of course, way too far out to even say something about it. I'm just saying this is what this is what I'm looking for. This little something right here. That's exactly what we're all looking for to forecast a system ahead of other models. As we now look into the general precipitation, of course, here we have Arthur. You want to look at what we saw with the winds, circular-like systems that have a lot of precipitation in the middle, a very decent sized low pressure system. And this is what we'll be looking for. See, we are going to be possibly having maybe big system across the northern Atlantic. But really, usually every single year at the time of year, we look for low pressure systems off the coast of Africa. But at this moment, we're not really looking for West Africa right now. Because we are seeing a decent amount of shear, and it'll be very unfavorable. Even though we have really moist air at that point, but we also have a decent amount of shear flow, so that won't really work out. So we're really looking out for the Caribbean at this point, in my opinion. I'm looking for the whole tropical Atlantic right now. But if I were to if I were to have a question of where my next system will form in the coming weeks, I would say the Caribbean, because we have very favorable conditions, very little shear, warm SSTs, moist air. Exactly what we're going to be looking for. Here we have those low pressures forming by June 1st. And look, this is exactly what we're looking for. Something to form, possibly in the Caribbean area. It doesn't exactly have to hit the Caribbean, but something to form in the Caribbean or the vicinity of the Caribbean. So that's what we're looking for. But I hope you guys did enjoy the video. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. I do apologize for the rather long video. But bye, guys.